Good morning, everyone. I'm Larimer County Commissioner Jody Shai McNally, Chair of the Legislative Committee for the Colorado Forest Health Advisory Council, and we are here for a very important meeting on July 7th, 2023, and I call this meeting to order, and let's do roll call.
All right, I'm going to go down the list. I have here Samantha Albert.
Present.
Christy Belton.
I'm here. Morning.
Morning. Pat Dorsey. Director Matt McCombs.
Good morning.
Commissioner Jody Shattuck McNally.
Good morning, present.
Mark Morgan.
Here. Thank you.
Julie Stencil let us know she wouldn't be making it. And Sylvan White Skunk. So we do have enough members for quorum.
Fantastic. And I'll just have James or just Josh introduce yourself real quick and why you're here on my behalf. Well, because of for helping support me today.
Yeah. Hey, everyone. Josh Roberts, Mitigation Coordinator with Larimer County Office of Emergency Management. It's nice to meet you all, see you all this morning. And yeah, as Commissioner said, here to support her throughout this meeting, take notes and things. So thank you.
Thanks for joining, Josh, and welcome. He's new to our team, and so he's been doing a fantastic job. Been up in all the Firewise communities and ambassador communities, and he's been up in the foothills walking with residents and communities trying to get them. They're doing some great work up there. So anyway, moving on, just want to make sure everyone's thought who's this new face. So we have the next item is our approval of the minutes from June 30th, 2023. I just really, be honest with you, just glanced over them quickly. Did anyone else any concerns or questions or additions or changes? Then I welcome a motion to approve the minutes.
I so approve. I so moved.
Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Great. We have a motion on the table. All those in favor, say aye and raise aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? All right. We're clipping at a good pace today. So we have one big agenda item today. And I appreciate everyone having extra time today to have these discussions. But we've had a lot of wonderful, amazing presentations, a lot of great conversations. And now we need to kind of formulate at least an initial list. And Courtney has already started an amazing list for us kind of talking about who was presenting kind of the ideas. And I didn't know, Courtney, if you wouldn't mind sharing that list. I think you've already sent it out to folks, but maybe you could, people want to pull that up and look at it real quick as we move through that list. So my suggestion, and I don't know if any of you had a suggestion, is we just kind of go through all the topics that we've covered and just briefly talk about what we think an idea or if it's on the list for developing a legislative solution and what you all think about that. Does anyone else have any other ideas how to tackle these topics? Because we've covered a lot of ground the last couple of months. And thank you all for your hard work and engagement and talking. So Angela, go ahead. I appreciate any input you have.
Yeah, thanks, Jody. So good morning, everyone. It might be helpful just to refresh ourselves on the process in terms of developing legislative recommendations over the next few weeks and what that will look like. So I'm happy to walk through that if folks want to.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea because we're just making some recommendations that go into the full council. Let's just remind ourselves because it has been a full year and we've been pretty busy the last year. So
definitely. So today, hopefully have a robust discussion. The document that we shared with those sort of list of recommendations, just a reminder that those are sort of policy recommendations that we gleaned from the experts who presented, right? So those are recommendations provided by those experts, obviously up to you all to discuss them and determine if you sort of agree with them or want to move certain recommendations forward. And so today, time to have a robust conversation about that. Next week on the 14th, you all could be in a position in your meeting to vote on up to 5 legislative concepts to recommend via the annual report for the Forest Health Council, but also orally to the Wildfire Matters Review Committee. And just a reminder that, you know, those recommendations, will be presented to the Wildfire Matters Review Committee, 2 members of the legislature, but then they will also go to the governor in the form of the annual report from the Forest Health Council. So recommendations on the 14th, likely a vote there. And the reason we need to back it out that far is because we would ideally like to send your recommendations to the full council on July 20th, which is a week before our July 27th quarterly meeting, at which the full council will need to vote on recommendations in order to get them to the Wildfire Matters Review Committee in time and get them into our final year-end report. So does that make sense to folks? Oh, you're muted, Jody.
Thank you, Angela, and I appreciate that. And that's, that was the other question I had was the annual report, because we have covered a lot of ground. So this is great that we've already I appreciate you all kind of combining all that information so we don't have to go back and recreate it. So I think that's been a really great strategy. I was wondering about the July 20th. Is it July 20th meeting?
Yep.
Or 27th?
No, sorry, not July 20th meeting, July 27th.
Okay, so where is that? Do we know if that's in person yet or
It's
virtual?
fully remote. It's fully
Okay.
remote. Yeah.
Great. I just, as you know, things are getting pretty busy. I want to pause real quick and recognize council member White Skunk has joined us, Pat Dorsey, and now a guest, Katie Novak. I think that's, do I have everyone that's joined us now? Just to have for the minutes. Okay.
Yep.
So
and Katie's a council member as well, just for the record. And the last thing I'll say, Jody, is so this list of recommendations that Courtney and I pulled together from the presentations you've all seen, it's, I think, important to remember that, you know, these are the topics that you had experts come and present on. These are by no means limiting, in the sense that you all could suggest things today and discuss legislative recommendations today that are not on this list, right? So don't limit yourself necessarily to what you heard from folks. Yeah.
No, I appreciate you adding that too. And no, I did not mean to mean that Katie's not a full council member. She just, I know she's not on, especially on our legislative, but she's been coming and very consistently and bringing some great feedback from the Forest Health Collaborative Network. So that's great. So let's start with our first topic, which is at the bottom of the list. If everyone wants to go down the bottom, just to kind of remind ourselves, we just had a legislative recap at that meeting and talked about things that did, you know, that got passed and get passed, and we had that first meeting. So just don't want to go into that too much, but May 19th, we talked with Becky Bollinger from the Colorado Climate Center, and we had a presentation on vapor pressure deficit, forest, and wildfires. And that is some of the things that we heard from is she's not sure how to mitigate the impacts of vapor pressure deficit, and it's just learning more the best ways about managing forests. So so that was a great presentation. So we've had several presentations of vapor pressure deficit, but I wanted to just kind of go back to that first one. And then Katie Novak, McGrath Novak, she heard about that they wanted to talk about maintaining funding for existing programs so collaboratives can grow and have consistent funding. And I still want to make sure we remember Katie bringing that recommendation to that meeting. So then on May 26th, we talked about, we had that great presentation on biomass from Dr. Curtis Makis, and that was from the Colorado State Forest Service, and looking at for biomass community opportunity zones and looking at funding and increasing funding to the Colorado Wood Utilization and Marketing Program, which I appreciate getting some hard copies myself. I don't know if the council got some hard copies yet, but that would be great to maybe give out to some of the council members in the future. And then increase the amount of fire firewood burning EPA-approved stoves to increase demand for firewood, possibly a rebate or a tax incentive from that recommendation. And then on, was that also on the 26th, or then June 2nd, Katie McGrath Novak and was on our presenter, and also Dr. Camille Stevens Rumman. We had the Forest Collaborative Priorities and the Post-Fire Regeneration Failure Conversation. And so we had those recommendations from the Forest Collaborative Network Priorities, and they collected those. So there's their first recommendation was support sustained consistent funding for collaboratives. Current funding should be a great baseline moving forward. They also talked about capacity funding is needed to sustain the collaboratives at all stages of readiness. For example, the furworm capacity funding was still a project-based, and people are looking for broader capacity. She wanted to create a catalyst fund for undersourced areas to start collaborative groups, give ample time for collaboratives to prepare grant applications, start preparing people with information sessions and meetings early if the application timeline can't be changed, and then remove barriers to prescribe fire implementation on private lands in order, in Colorado, in order to make it more readily accessible for a tool for practitioners. I know I'm just reading from this, but I'm just trying to kind of spark our memories. And then Dr. Camille talked about capacity is the huge issue for replanting trees. We have the policies like the Replant Act that mandates any unforested acre become forested again on Forest Service land, and we achieve around 10% of the land needs to be reforested any given year. We're lacking a lot of capacity, and I'm happy that this nursery has this new investment. And going beyond the nursery, we have a lack of knowledge and workforce to collect seeds, and how do we grow seeds optimally in a greenhouse to be planted. And then on June 23rd, we had Dr. Sarah Hart. Well, we talked about vapor pressure deficit and the impacts on forests, talking about decreasing stand density to decrease competition for soil moisture, but just not fully sorted by the research yet. Studies need to confirm if reduced competition for soil moisture would increase survivability. We have adaptive management, and we talked about a task force, asking the legislator to pull a task force together to compile all this data on vapor pressure deficit and forest management techniques to make recommendations to the Forest Health Council, governor, and legislature. And there's a similar group doing something similar. So we don't want to, try to recreate the wheel, but maybe amplify or co-work together on that. And then last week, which seems like a long time ago, we had Derek Losterter and Haley Strevey from Colorado Coalition for the Poudre Watershed. But we had Derek come talk about biochar, and he supports the Bipartisan Biochar Research Act of 2023, the state support and federal financial assistance for farmers and ranchers to apply biochar to soils, kind of this like the STAR Soil Health Program and EQIP, and then support production application of biochar in state lands, state land trusts. Biochar credits could raise revenue for public education, public support county regional flame cap kiln libraries for responsible /disposal on private lands, and then support public-facing biochar demonstrations such as installation of a pyrolysis energy system at CSU Spur campus or the National Western Talks complex. Also to date, we have also been able, with Haley, they've been able to replant post-fire on private land. There's still that conversation and challenges with the U.S. Forest Service to let them plant, and we're hoping those changes will happen the next year and those partnerships to be expanded. We also need crews of skilled laborers spending the entire spring and fall planting seedlings. We also need crews collecting seeds to provide those seedlings, and we need highly skilled workers are needed to collect seeds, arborists with this knowledge, and can these skills be developed in new community college programs being developed as a result of Senate Bill 2330, Senate Bill 5. So also, I wanted to remind everyone, the other thing that we had talked about in the first meeting was the insurance issue that was brought up with some of the mitigation groups that talked about they were having trouble, like Emberline, some of them trying to get out and do the works on private lands, and other areas are having trouble getting insurance coverage, and also, for example, the Big Thompson Watershed Coalition bought the air curtain burner, basically gave it to the Loveland Fire Rescue Authority because they did not have the liability to use it. So they gave it to the fire authority so they would have more insurance coverage. And I know that was, I was approached by my director of Office of Emergency Management, who is on the Colorado Association of Emergency Managers. They are they're watching what we're doing, and they were curious if we were going to talk or recommend such a legislative priority about the insurance piece, because they feel like that's really a missing thing. And they would be very interested in supporting or working or being a major stakeholder in some kind of legislation and being a big voice at that. So I wanted to kind of bring that too. I just had that conversation this week, but that was something they were wondering if we were talking. And Katie, don't worry about being late. Glad you're listening in and here. I was just reading the comments. So anything else I missed from our conversations or ideas? Just a quick overview. I know I was kind of speed reading. I know you read all that, but I just thought it's great just to kind of spark our brains. So with that, I'm open for discussion of any other thoughts or ideas or suggestions to add to that list of things we want to kind of talk about today as a legislative idea, solution, question. Mr. Morgan.
Yes, I think I do not want a couple things that we've already dealt with to fall through the cracks. And one here is that I think what we did with workforce development, I really appreciate everybody's effort, but I'm still under the opinion that that's just a good start and we've got a long ways to go. I also think that the funding for the different activities that the state forest is involved in, if we get the funding for them, that, as I understand it, allows them to leverage for funding from the federal government. Is that correct, Director McCombs?
Yeah, Mark. So it sort of depends on the funding source and what its application is, but I would say, like, on a whole, in this moment, with the amount of federal resources that are available, anything that we bring to bear typically has an opportunity to be leveraged for sure. Like the G&A funding from last session, I just checked with Aaron Green, and they're the regional office is supposed to get back to us within a couple of weeks to bring another $2 million to the agency to continue G&A work. So that was just an example of how federal funding was leveraged with state funding and could be going forward.
Well, what I see there is, from an industry side, I see the activities that you're involved in kind of as an overview. We kind of watch what's going on, and you're getting people hired, you're putting people on the ground, and you're putting people in programs. And I guess what I'm saying is I see tangible results. And from an industry business side, when you're seeing tangible results, that's where you put your resources. So I guess I'm real interested in expanding that. Any good neighbor authority opportunities you have, co-op agreements with the feds, and I think, excuse me, and we've got, I just think we need to push that as far and as fast as we can, and especially on the workforce development. And I guess that's it for right now.
Thank you, Mark. Christy had her hand raised.
Thank you. I had many of the same thoughts that Mark did, and I've even got in my notes, do we want to put some of our effort and recommendation toward continuing what we started last year? Personally, after reviewing this great summary, which is really good, some of my comments were, I would be hesitant to focus on any recommendations for things like biochar, VPD stuff. And I would really prefer to focus more on the insurance. I have the insurance issue in my notes, and maybe just making sure that, you know, what we started last year continues, because I mean, I'm not sure that really the challenge has been met, you know, with the boots on the ground. And do we need to, you know, maybe focus a little bit more attention on that and continue that? And the seedling issue, you know, that's more boots on the ground category. Those are just my thoughts.
Thank you, Christy. Yeah, great conversations. I was thinking the same thing. I know I've gotten asked that question already from some of the partners on the ground and also from the community colleges. I actually met one of the administrators from Colorado Mountain College by accident at a thing, and also Front Range Community College president asked me and said, "Hey, what's the status on this with the Senate Bill 5? When is it? When's the money gonna be available? How is that going?" And I said, "That's a good question. I need to ask that." So I don't know if we can ask, you know, what's the next steps with that, and you know, what does the progress look like? What does the timeline look like? And when do they think they might be getting that money to those programs? Because it doesn't do much. So just, it doesn't do much if it's not, we got it passed, but if it's not happening, then how can we help support that? Samantha.
Yeah, thanks, Jody. And to that point, I mean, what could we be doing in the interim if it's going to take a while to figure out the funding? Or, I mean, is there any other policy or any other work we could do on the workforce front? Exactly to Christy's point, it would kind of be a shame to focus on that and then just kind of have to wait around and see what happens.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And I do
Who do
agree
we build
that,
a fire under?
yeah. So, so I think, when we talked about vapor pressure deficit and all those things, I think the idea of a task force, at least just getting some of those, experts together, even for a short-term, task force, just to kind of see what kind of ideas or conditions of mitigation, or even just, you know, giving them asking them a question to answer a question, like a basic question of how does vapor pressure deficit factor into the management of our forest health in Colorado over the next 10 to 20 years. I mean, I do hate to put it out there, and I know it's not. I just think if we get all those folks in the room, because we heard from a lot of folks, and obviously it's still kind of an emerging issue, but I thought if at least we got some of those people we heard from and had them had a short-term task force to come out with a report, then we'd have more information for the Forest Health Council as a whole to present and have a deeper conversation. So, Mr. Morgan.
Yeah, on biochar and on vapor deficit and all of those, my first question was, is the research getting done? Is the research adequately funded? And are we then looking for the results of this? You know, we can recommend that we intervene for funding. That's essentially, we can't do the research ourselves, so we can either intervene and recommend for funding, or if the funding is already being adequately taken care of and the research is being done, then maybe what we need to do is let this thing simmer a little bit and see what the results are. And I'm looking for things that I can actively affect, and boots on the ground or whatever you want to call it, but we can actively affect and get things done with. And if there's something I'm missing here, does anybody have anything that says, if we do this, we're going to get this result?
So I don't think that I'm suggesting a study. I think the studies have already been done, and there's a lot of experts out there, even at the national level. I just think having all those folks with those different research things coming together in a room and discussing kind of the research that's out there already, and having them just have that, like having all those people that have the presentations come together, and with that question or discussion about how is this impacting the health of our forests in Colorado going forward. And it is something that we need to look at for any kind of mitigation member. So I'm not looking for funding a study, just like to have a task force sit down of all the experts that know this a lot more in depth than myself, because this is something I'm just learning about, but just to provide us some of that information so we don't have to kind of figure out how we present this to the Forest Health Council, because I think it'd be great to have just a recommendation, because obviously this is going to impact the future of our forest health and also the severity of our fires. And so just something I think would be interesting to talk or have some of the experts kind of help us sift through all that. Just an idea. And I agree with you on the boots on the ground and what we need to do to kind of continue the work that we already have. We just don't want to just start that momentum and then just kind of drop it. We want to kind of make sure this is happening. So, so I agree about boots on the ground, but it sure would be nice to have some of this vapor pressure deficit questions asked with, especially if it's going to impact how our forests look and how our reforestation goes forward. I think Christy was first and then Angela.
Thank you. So I'm having trouble trying to figure out how to phrase it. So I'll just do the best I can. The vapor pressure deficit discussion just sounds like informational to me. I'm having a hard time correlating anything having to do with BPD to an action item. I think it helps me to understand better why our forests are so unhealthy, but I think there are a lot of things that explain why our forests are so unhealthy. So I'm having trouble dedicating a lot of time, and I have trouble dedicating any dollars or recommendation of dollars for that research. I'm interested in it, but again, I'm just having trouble correlating it to action. Hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, and again, I just want to emphasize, I'm not asking that we say we should spend money on our research. I just want to get people, have a task force come and sit down at the table with all their research and talk about, is there something we could do about this? It is impacting our forests. And then is there something coming out of that we would need to look at to help mitigate or plan for with our forests? So it's actually trying not to have them all go do another research project, but pulling all those experts in the room to talk about how this is impacting the health of our forests. So Angela now, and then Director McCombs.
Thanks, Jody. And Matt, I feel like you'll either say the same thing I'm about to say or the complete opposite. So I apologize, but I am wondering if this could be a recommendation that falls under sort of the administrative directive category. So, you know, Jody, I could see this council recommending that the State Forest Service, for instance, host a forum, you know, that links up with their adaptive silviculture work that they're already doing, and basically, yeah, brings together those sort of lead scientists to discuss. I think there is also potentially an intersection with. So the governor's office has a new Office of Climate Preparedness that was created last year, and they are really sort of quickly developing a climate preparedness plan. I think that has to be done by the end of the calendar year, and I'm sort of tangentially involved in that. But I think under that umbrella, you know, you could potentially direct the agencies to host some kind of sort of informational forum. So I'll just put that suggestion out there. Again, I think if it's administrative, I think it's separate from the 5 legislative recommendations that this council makes. So you can keep that in mind too. And Matt, go ahead.
I put in the chat almost word for word. Yeah, so I wanted to just highlight for folks that we have with funding from last year, as well as some federal leverage from Senator Bennett's office, fully funded our adaptive silviculture for climate change project at State Forest. We have one going on in the Gunnison National Forest. And this concept or this impactful ecologic and atmospheric condition is included in the science and the considerations that are being brought to bear in the actual implementation of these experimental silvicultural treatments. And in addition, we do have we are in the real-time development of the carbon accounting framework for the state of Colorado, as well as a co-benefit tool for forest management as it relates to carbon storage. So I think that to Angela's point, this could be something that this body could advise you want us to provide focus on and engagement in the long run. And we could introduce you to Ashley Woolman, who's the carbon specialist that's been hired. We could engage the group in not only routine briefings on the adaptive silvicultural projects, but we could go look at them once they're implemented up in State Forest. And so or in Gunnison. So there's some really, I think, good options to keep what we're learning integrated into our long form conversations that will persist, hopefully not just this year, but in the out year as well. And that might satisfy, I think, Commissioner Shattuck McNally's interest in keeping this at the forefront of our mind, while at the same time, it allow us to kind of move to those more targeted investments that we might want to recommend for this upcoming legislative session, as well as the governor builds out his agenda for the session as well. How's that sound?
That sounds like an excellent idea, and you pretty much, that's exactly what I'm hoping for. I don't want to just have these presentations. I think this is something that we have to kind of at least keep the conversation going and explore, because if this is going to impact how our forests look like and how they're going to respond to fire, and if they're going to not be thriving, I think it's something we need to be really proactive about and figure out what we can do now to address that. So I think all those other groups certainly have all the expertise. And I know Director McCombs, like you said, you already have some of this going. I think that's an excellent suggestion. So how about we put that on the list as administrative, kind of exactly how Director McCombs and Angela presented going forward, just to have that administrative recommendation to kind of help us wrangle this topic and how this looks at our forests going forward. And I'd love to attend that so I can learn more. What do you think about that, Mr. Morgan?
I had another, that sounds fine. I had one other comment that kind of came to the forefront for me in the last couple of weeks. In a lot of our fuels work right now, we're running up against the ability to move market biomass. And I would suggest an area of study that you might be interested in would be fuels manipulation and not necessarily removal. In a recent meeting with the Arapahoe Rose Forest, there seemed to be a great deal of resistance to doing fuels manipulation and leaving some of the essentially masticating, mulching, and this kind of thing. And I was curious about that, because that's a very, very, very cost-effective way to reduce fires and fire intensity. And they seem to be on a course of a whole hog course of fuels removal or nothing. And I feel that they're missing an opportunity in there. And I guess I would like to understand better why, through maybe Director McCombs or whoever here, what you've got going, because a lot of our fuel stands are like 60 tons per acre. And they said that they wanted to be under 6 tons per acre for a fuel standard. Well, the idea in fire suppression a lot of times is to put the fuel on the ground, or put the fire on the ground, and you can manipulate fuel a whole lot cheaper than you can harvest it and haul it to town and try to find a market for it. And I would like to suggest somewhere that we look at fuels manipulation again rather than total removal. And that's just a suggestion to this group if they have any interest in it, or if that's already being done. I'm not aware of it, and I don't want to this resulted in a bunch of discussions with the Arapahoe Roosevelt, and I'd also like to know from Director McCombs whether this is a resistance statewide or just on this forest, because I think it's a problem for you to get your fuels work and your fire safety work done. How's that for a new one for you? You didn't see that coming, huh?
So maybe I'll just answer real quick, Commissioner. So, there is a broad suite of, there's lots of discretion for forest supervisors to conduct their business in the ways that they think is in the best interest of that forest. And so we see kind of an array of different approaches being taken as it relates to the tolerance for different approaches, different modalities. And I think, on the west slope and certainly on the, I would say on the Medmo and the GMUG, the San Juan, there's a lot of focus on forest management and actual removal. And where there's not removal, there's typically manipulation and then burning, right? Whereas I think we're struggling on the ARP to sort of meet some sort of, we're not in full alignment to the extent that the State Forest Service, and certainly I would like to see a larger focus on forest management activities to change fuel conditions in order to facilitate fires return and or application, where I think the forest and some of the collaborative entities are really focused on just securing enough ground in order to allow broadcast to be restored at a much, much larger scale. And so there's some tension in there as it relates to, is this possible? Is this where we should be putting our resources and focus, or should traditional approaches be more dominant right now? And I'll just tell you, Mark, I don't know exactly where that's going to land. What we're trying to continue to do is provide the best data, the best science, and then say yes when Forest asks for help as it relates to our authority under Good Neighbors, so that they have the capacity to move out with a more aggressive posture on forest management activities, and to potentially get some of the collaborative entities and some of the environmental community folks more comfortable that, like, we are trying to create fuel conditions such that fire can return in a way that's not, that doesn't have results that we just aren't tolerable publicly or ecologically. So that was a long-winded answer to a relatively targeted question, but it's, again, as well as I do, the forest soups and the fuels teams on each forest kind of have themselves they're in the driver's seat. So we have to continue to work together. We do through under NEPA. We do so when we discuss joint chiefs projects and such. And we're getting better at, I think, being more targeted in our language around what we think is best for forests right now. I'll just say for this group, globally, like, our contention is that there's an enormous amount of forest management needs to occur in order for Colorado to meet its goals around living with wildland fire, restoring fire to its natural role, and that moving on, especially in those places of highest risk, is where we should be focusing our time and energy. And I think we agree on that, but it's when we push outside of the WUI and start pushing into some of those interface or matrix landscapes between the deep backcountry and those landscapes that are close to homes and businesses and other infrastructure, is where we, I think, struggle to come to a perfectly aligned vision of how we should be moving forward and leveraging limited resources and capacity we have.
I did not want to put you on the spot here, and that was not my intent, and that was a great answer. And I think the thing that I see there is this. I was asking for your overview because I did not want to extrapolate what I consider is a concern here statewide if it's being dealt with on all the other forests within the region and it's being taken care of. And it sounds like it's more localized here. And I understand very much that the forest supervisor is the king of the neighborhood, and what he says goes within reason. And I think I think it's not appropriate after your answer for this group to consider this concern that it is more localized. So I thank you.
Yeah, and I just, I went off a little because I want folks to understand the context, right? I mean, this ebb and flow and the tension between, who's the boss of what and who gets to lead where. I mean, that's the nexus of the federalism quandary, right? Where these are Colorado landscapes that are managed by the federal government, so we have to operate in tandem and in partnership. And so it's important that this body continue to ask tough questions like that and put me on the spot and let me live with my answer. And so, and so that we can have robust dialogue and really clear dialogue about the things that are in front of us, because the time is now. The resources are available, and we need to move with a sense of purpose and a fire in our belly. And the only way we do that is if we have hard conversations, Mark. So I appreciate it. And I always will try to be as candid as possible. And I probably will get kicked in the shins from time to time for saying things perhaps that don't always align with what others believe.
I very much appreciate that. And to put my agenda right out front, what I see is the State Forest Service getting results, and I'm going to go tooth and nail and shin kicking all I can to get resources on the ground so that you guys can do your good neighbor policy and actually manage some forest. And I go out there and I see who's got guys on the ground. I see who's out cruising timber. I see who's out setting stuff up. And to me, that's results. And the industry sees that as results. And I'm going to push it just as hard as I can. And I don't want anybody telling them that I've got a hidden agenda, because I don't. There it is right up front. So thank you.
Thank
Well,
you.
excellent conversation. We have a lot more to talk about. So how about my suggestion, just trying to get us moving along. Sounds like we've moved the vapor pressure deficit, kind of a form administrative kind of item to ask to do that. And should we say we want to do that? Director McCombs, is 6 months enough time to pull that together, or is it a year?
No, I think you could, yeah, it depends on what you direct us to do, but we can I think 6 months is fair for having setting up a formal discussion and bringing in experts. We could build that around one of our larger meetings if we wanted to. That's, I think, yeah, 180 days, we could absolutely pull something together.
Cool. So I think what you guys, Angela and you had suggested, pulling in, the new governor's climate director and some of these other conversations and these vapor pressure deficits, and how does this all look and go forward? And because I feel like that's something we should at least have more knowledge as a Forest Health Council, because if we're really talking about forest health, if we want to get upstream, we have all this mitigation work, but we also need to look upstream for the forest health of the long term with changing conditions. And so I think the more we understand all the variables and the conditions, it gives us a lot more information to make informed decisions as a council. And so I guess I just say if we have a year, we have the busy legislative session. I just don't see that happening in the spring with you guys running around. So I feel like if we could do it in the next 6 months, that might be a really good information for us going forward. So is everyone good with that? Thumbs up for that recommendation? Should we make that a formal vote, Courtney?
Yeah, I think a formal vote sounds good. And then if someone could also just summarize, there was a lot of discussion, but maybe like what the deliverable is in terms of like the State Forest Service is convening in 6 months a discussion around climate adaptive silviculture. Like if someone could just summarize it one more time for the notes, that would be great.
Sure, I can do that. And you guys can help me. And then I also like to take Mr. Morgan, just on a side note, Mr. Morgan's question. Let's put that make a big note of that and put it on the parking lot for a question that we're asking as a committee. So how can we help, that? So let's make sure we don't lose that question, because I think that's important, and make a side note and put that question for Mr. Morgan's on like a little sticky in the parking lot and where we want to have that asked. But so back to the other one, we'd love to ask the Colorado State Forest Service to convene a forum or meeting around adaptive silviculture and vapor pressure deficit, and how this impacts the future health of our forests, and what measures or mitigation actions we should consider. Does that sound specific? What do you think, Director McCombs?
Yeah, I mean, I think what you're after is what are the climatic, ecologic, social, economic conditions that are impacting our ability to be successful as it relates to responding to climate change in real time, and maybe matching that to what we're doing, and matching it to what we like to do, and matching it to where the emergent science tells us we might be. So however that, I think that's kind of what you're asking. However that comes out, we can. Well, the language, the directional language is not terribly important. What's important is as we build out the agenda and the session, that it's meeting the intent of this group and in the larger group. And so we'll work with that. We'll draw on our friends from CSU and our other institutions that we work with, and we'll put on a really nice presentation that'll continue to grow, not just the Ledge Committee, but the entire body's awareness on where Colorado should be moving.
And can I tack on to it just a little bit? And I don't know if this is appropriate or not, but could state legislators, other local leaders and members of the Forest Health Council come in and be able to listen and learn as we don't need any part of at the table have the conversation, but could we be in the audience listening?
Yeah, I think the intention that should be expressed from my perspective is that would be the targeted audience, that this is an advisory body to the governor and the assembly, and that they should be the target audience for awareness raising and context establishment, so that the policymakers and the key stakeholders invested know what they're talking about and feel good about advocating for policy. So that would be the target audience, but I would just tell you that everything would be a public forum for because that's kind of like just how we roll. And so, but I think these are. I'll tell you what, I'm saying everything like this is going to evolve into something. This is going to actually potentially kickstart some of the informational sessions that we've been kind of toying around with ourselves about how do we continue to strategically engage the public as things are moving like in real time on what and where we should be headed. And so that this could be a great instigator to pull that off. So I appreciate it.
Okay, so that is the motion to direct the Colorado State Forest Service to put together this forum regarding this adaptive silviculture, just to be technical, and lead it broad, kind of broad too, so you guys can develop it. Does that sound fair?
Yeah, you could maybe say in the notes, Courtney, like to include but not exclusively X, Y, and Z topics, so that you give us some discretion to integrate other topics that might be appropriate to support a conversation like that, if that's okay with the committee.
Sounds great to me. All right, I'm looking for a motion for that.
I'll move.
You just move, okay, and does anybody want to make a second?
I'll second.
Okay, any further discussion? All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any
Aye.
opposed? Cool, thank you, council member. Any opposed? Okay, first item off the agenda. And then just a side note, one other item, and this is Mr. Morgan sparked my brain. We did have that conversation about fuels, biomass, and how do we address all this fuels there on the ground and how we get them out of the, how do we deal with those? And I heard this again from a lot of folks is they have a lot of slash piles, but they can't burn them. They don't have the money to move them. And so can we add that to the bottom of the list for discussion later today on our meeting, Courtney? I think, because remember we had that at the beginning, like what are we going to do with all this biomass? So that was another thing that we didn't have a formal, we had a little bit of presentation on. Okay, so let's move on to the next one was the insurance piece. I think it sounds like everyone wanted to have a discussion about the insurance piece. Anybody want to comments on that? Mr. Morgan.
I have a question as much as any, but Director McCombs, I'm working off memory here, and that's real scary at my age. But I think the state used to have I believe it was a $600,000 incident buffer when they were actually doing control burns and pile burning. I think there was and I didn't have time to research this today, but I think, and then Governor Hickenlooper waived that requirement for the ability of the lawsuit to begin immediately, which invited quite a few lawsuits in other places and essentially put the State Forest Service out of the burning business at the time. But I believe that there was a $600,000 de facto insurance coverage from the state for the State Forest Service. And I don't want to state that as gospel, but I'm pretty sure that's the number. And if you have, it's just like when you have when you have law enforcement people or whatever, they have to have some, if they do their job and they do it right, essentially that they have to have some protection from lawsuit or prosecution. And that was essentially the thinking back then. And it would be a tough sell, but I think you need to reinstate that. I think that's a beginning point so that other agencies can do this. And insurance is really a sticker in everything we try to do right now. And just real quickly, not only do you have insurance regulations or the ability to buy the insurance or buy the coverage, I've looked into doing this a couple of times, but you also have, you literally have the insurance companies setting the standards for what they will accept for the people and the things you do on the ground. It's, for example, if you have Class 8 trucks these days, they will tell you what your driver's records can be. They will literally tell you the age of your drivers. You have to have an average mix of so great an age. And so the insurance regulation of this, I think, is a real tough but real important opportunity that could be tackled legislatively within the state. And I think that I think we have to do it or we don't have a chance. I don't think it's going to be easy. I think this is going to be a real shin kicking match, but there has to be some direction back to the insurance companies, and their result is what they always do is they'll say, oh, we're not going to operate in that market, just like they've done in California right now with homeowners insurance. But they threaten that about 15 times for every time they actually do it. So I think we have to get some kind of insurance relief, both for the agencies and for private and for nonprofit groups. And I think that could be done legislatively. And one of the problems that I've run into tackling in this in the past, because I've worked on this before, is that a great many of the members of the legislators are attorneys or former attorneys, and they don't like to tackle anything that reduces the ability to raise a lawsuit. It's as simple as that. But I think the public might be ready to deal with this if they get the results they need.
Thanks, Mr. Morgan. So we had this conversation that I said that the Colorado Association of Emergency Managers had approached me and asked me if we were having this conversation. And I said, we had been talking, or it had been brought up, and they're looking to maybe partner and look at some kind of bill. And they'd like to be, if we do suggest something like this, they were looking to maybe be part of the stakeholdering and help kind of with the craft, whatever crafting and stuff. And they were curious about what we were talking. We did hear this from some of the nonprofit groups, that it's very hard for us to, for them to get insurance to do some of this work. And I think it was that meeting we had, was it June 23rd or June 7th, Courtney, that we looked at the California example that had just passed and been introduced. I don't know if you, I was looking for that, to read that before the meeting today. Do you have that? Or maybe James had it, that we were having that discussion about what California had just done. But this would be a heavy lift, but I think we've heard a lot about this, and it would be a recommendation for us to work with stakeholders to kind of craft some kind of legislation. We're in the business of providing some of the challenges or ideas, but we don't have to really, the stakeholdering and all the work with the legislators would help craft it. Director McCombs, what are your thoughts on this?
Hey, thanks, Jody. So I would just add that this is where we had the prescribed fire joint meeting between the Forest Health Advisory Council folks and the Colorado Fire Commission. So to Mark's question around how are we insured? We operate when the State Forest Service employees provide support to DFPC in execution of their burn plans. We do so under an MOU with DNR, and we're actually functioning under our Division of Forestry authorities and have liability coverage from the state of Colorado. And so we don't really, I'll just be candid. This is really a conversation that I think belongs in the Fire Commission, and they're going to take on as part of their prescribed fire strategic plan. I have a meeting later today that's going to be talking about that. that what are the sort of the next steps of putting a strategic plan together. And the Forest Health Advisory Council will be part of the stakeholder entities that influence the development of that strategic plan for Colorado. And a component of that, Mark, will be liability. So it's smoke, liability, and resources, and then our ability to operate across boundaries in consultation with our federal partners. So those are the key things that we got to wrestle with as a state in order to get moving. What California did was created a $20 million liability pool that can help backstop some of the concerns associated with cultural burning and burning by private citizens and NGOs and communities. So as well as CAL FIRE. So they are actually California self-insured, I think, for their prescribed program, but this would be for communities and cultural burners. And I think Katie put it in the chat, the article. So, this one I think could be just one that we say we are interested in this, and it's the sense of this committee that we want to be active participants in the prescribed fire committee of the Colorado Fire Commission and ensure that we are participating with our forest health lens, our wildfire mitigation lens in the process going forward. Because I'll just tell you, Morgan and I are we're trying to two-track this thing, but at the same, or not two-track this thing, try and put it on one track where, and I think if this group's comfortable that we give the Fire Commission some deference on leading on this policy formulation, but we explicitly say we want to be intimately involved in these discussions as the strategic planning process kicks off. And I'll have more information on that in our next meeting, because we're actually having a conversation later today to sort of rough out what the next steps will be for that strategic planning process that Chief Morgan is committed to, that the Colorado Fire Commission via the Prescribed Fire Committee is committed to, and that will ultimately drive these conversations around liability, smoke, and capacity, which are I think remain the key core issues around being able to take anything to scale as it relates to pile burning and or broadcast burning.
And before I have Mr. Morgan speak, I'm on that subcommittee with you, and it's very fascinating to sit, and so is Katie. When we sat and listened to you and Mr. Moore and Chief Moore talk about this, it was fascinating. And I agree. I wouldn't think that we would. I agree. We don't want to two-track. We want to work with, give them the lead on this. I would also want to suggest, since the Emergency Management Managers Association sounds like they're interested in having this discussion too, is maybe add to that recommendation that to bring them in as stakeholders, since they're interested in bidding into tonight. So maybe I think that's a great suggestion. Yeah.
Sheriffs.
Yeah.
State fire chiefs. Yeah. Everybody wants in on this high risk, high reward activity that we all understand and believe and agree needs to be utilized much more effectively on a much greater scale.
I think that's an excellent suggestion. So Mr. Morgan and then Christy.
I think that's excellent. I have a great deal of faith in Mike Morgan, and I think you guys acting together in concert is a good thing. I'm trying to expand or broaden all of your guys' ability to get this work done. That's what I'm trying to do, is put the tool in the toolbox. And one thing, California has some good ideas, and then some that I consider are suspect once in a while. But a few years ago, I kind of surveyed more of the Intermountain solutions to this through New Mexico, Arizona. And I actually had letters from their foresters and emergency managers that I presented a few years ago when we were working on this same project in Wyoming, Montana. And at that time, for having the most WUI areas, Colorado had actually the poorest program going at the time and the most restrictions. I guess I felt like they dealt with it the least. And so as a suggestion to you is all, maybe survey the other Intermountain states and how they go about doing it, because quite a few of them had a pretty good system. So it's just a place to look for you is all. And I would suggest that. And but I think realistically, somewhere where we can actually weigh in, and a lot of people are going to tackle this, and I'm glad if somebody else is doing the heavy lifting and you get it done, I'm good with that. Just get it done.
I think, great comments, Mr. Morgan. I agree so much with what Director McCombs said. So Christine, you're next, and then Director McCombs.
So quickly reading through the link that Katie just sent, is it too simple to say, can we do what they did? Like, can we as a committee and maybe Forest Health Council use this as an example, and recommend that we provide support and protection for prescribed fires? I mean, California just did it. It seems like a fairly simple thing to do and get behind, and it would have immediate results so that we could get some prescribed fires going again. And it addresses this insurance question that we've been talking about.
I think that's a great point. And I think, again, we probably, I think Director McCombs' point about letting the Fire Commission kind of lead this, that, you know, in the subcommittee that we're on, so that, you know, that does make sense for that. But I think Director McCombs made a good point. We want to make sure that we bring that we're allowed to bring the Forest Health Council lens to that. So we can say we think this is an important Forest Health tool. So, and I think we could just make that recommendation as a committee that, hey, we really think that this is something we'd love this to bring this conversation to the subcommittee and the Forest Health Council or the Fire Commission and see what we can do to be a supportive driving force to see that done. So Director McCombs. You're on mute. Sorry, Director McCombs, you're on mute.
Of course I am.
You're pulling a Jody.
Always with the mute, always with the mute. So there's a lot of energy, right? And a lot of desire to see us move more aggressively. And I think that that's healthy, and it's pushing the agencies into a great place to start taking on these really hard questions, as well as the full suite of partners and stakeholders that are interested. I like Katie, you know, one of the things that I consistently come back to is one of the things we have that's most effective for a state forester is our ability to convene conversations. And I think there's a hunger out there to be like, what are you doing, state of Colorado, leadership, stakeholders, like, what is our plan to start making major headway as it relates to our ability to utilize prescribed fire at a much larger scale? And maybe that could be another administrative recommendation that you are, you know, essentially recommending or directing the State Forest Service and DFPC, right? Because I think Chief Morgan is a member of the Forest Health Advisory Council, and to convene a larger conversation about, you know, that illuminates what's working elsewhere, what are the core issues and problems, and then would allow the agencies and others to be able to speak to what the strategic planning processes that we're about to launch is going to incorporate and how people could participate. That might satisfy some of there's angst, there's ambition, there's all these things sort of flowing into this issue. That might be some satisfactory ways to at least get everybody on the same page and nail down where the deficits are, and then give focus for both the Forest Health Advisory Council as well as the Colorado Fire Commission and others that want to participate in developing Colorado's path forward. So that would be another thing I'd be willing to. That one might need more than 6 months for us to pull that off. That could be a great early summer session that we could be working on as we develop the strategic planning process this winter, and that it could just give our stamp that, like, we've asked for this, which ergo expresses that we want to be active participants. Would that be satisfactory? Because I like what Katie's recommendation it gives us is a way to embrace it and move it. And then, you know, Councilmember White's got to be curious around the cultural practices. You know, that's a big feature of California's success, was amplifying the cultural practice of prescribed fire. And that, you know, when we have tribal communities involved, it seems to give some credibility and some legitimacy to something that is so high risk that other cultural histories, just there's no cultural history, and so they don't embrace it as easily. And so I think tribes have been leading in this space. So I'd be curious to just maybe hear from you on how you think tribal voices might be able to help push this issue to the forefront into some action.
It's a great question. Councilmember Whiteskunk, do you have any thoughts on that?
And he may have had to step away, but
Yeah, so let's do that.
That's an interesting piece that we would fold into any type of presentation or or
There he is.
session would be making sure that our tribal voices in particular in Colorado would be helping, again, give some integrity and some legitimacy to this idea that this is a good thing we should be doing, even if it's high risk.
I think that's a great suggestion. Councilmember White Skunk, what are your thoughts on that?
Yes, you know, that it's really interesting, you know, how we suppress and pre-suppress fires here locally on our reservations, and the meanings and the I'm trying to figure, I can say it in you, but it's nor a taboo, or it's something that is interesting, how it's developed and how we suppress and how we mitigate our fires here within the tribal lands, and particularly with agencies, interagencies assisting the tribes. But on the cultural traditional areas, the tribes really, both Southern Ute Mountain, there's no difference in our cultural traditional ways. But the thing of it is that we tend to put buffer zones in certain areas that are culturally sensitive from fires, and in that pre-suppression mode, we are 3 times ahead of the game of any man-made or Mother Nature caused fires. And what we're talking about in the programs, how do we initiate, you know, the funding, the legislative, the tribes are at a point to where, to a degree, to allow it to burn, but at the same time, they really would like to discuss at the table the differences of what it is to mitigate these fires, or even well before the fires, what is in place. There's particular areas on the Ute Mountain Ute Reservation particularly that is a no access zone, you know, for any kind of man-made or mechanical programs or projects to go in there. So it's really hard to get that across. And I'm working right now with our FMOs, our fire management officer, who's out of Oklahoma City. We changed the regional office from the Albuquerque area to the Oklahoma area, and that really is burdensome. It just takes us out of the picture and resources, and try to put in pre-suppression plans and other issues that we're faced with. We're lucky, knock on wood, that we haven't had any big catastrophe fires since the Mesa Verde fires, but locally in the San Juan National Forest and other areas, it's just it's just really hard to assist them when there's no communication and we sit readily available. But culturally, traditionally, we just like to be at the table to discuss the matter at hand, at what we know in our natural resource departments, as well as our Bureau of Indian Affairs, what they know about the area and how to mitigate and how to utilize whatever resources is available, whether it's funding, manpower, legislative issues. I think it's something that culturally it's really hard to explain, but when we look at the at it in black and white, we have more of a perspective of what it is and how we could assist in these developments and how we can utilize what's before us. So that's where we're at with a tribal perspective. This is the first time in a long time that we're at the table, and having representation at this level is extremely good for the tribes, both Ute Mountain and Southern Ute, and others, and just recently we had a conference with the Cheyenne Arapaho tribe, who are looking at land acquisitions in the Front Range in some of the national forest areas, utilizing the 1851 treaty, and in that forestry area that they're looking at as well. So we have these other tribal nations that are state of Colorado is Aboriginal lands to them as well. So it's interesting to be allowed to be at the table and discuss these issues as well. There's all kinds of culturally and traditional aspects to the fire itself and how we mitigate it as well. So those are the comments that I have.
Thank you, council member. So appreciate that perspective. It's really important to hear, and I'm grateful for your engagement in this committee. So just in the interest of time, and we have some more lists, I think we're kind of we all have kind of coalesced around this idea of making this another administrative direction. Is that an okay word to use, Courtney? To ask in the next year that the Colorado State Forest Service, Director McCombs, the Colorado Fire Commission, and Chief Moore, and the sub fire committee that we're working on, the joint committee, convene a meeting or discussion. What do you think, Director McCombs? Is this one big meeting enough for forum or a symposium?
Yeah, I think just, it's the sense of the committee that, or sense of the council, if approved writ large, that the Colorado State Forest Service, in cooperation with DFPC and other impacted agencies or organizations, should host a prescribed fire conference or informational session to help further the knowledge and awareness of the Forest Health Advisory Council, such that it could continue to participate in policy formulation and other, administrative, I don't know. You know what I'm saying? I was trying to actually write that, Courtney, so it might actually help, in just sense of the group. They want to have some additional information. They want to be involved in the strategic planning effort, and that it's up to us, the agencies, to provide that forum and opportunity to continue to learn and provide input, something along those lines.
And then add the extra that we want to also add having the culturally traditional conditions and engage all the tribes on this discussion. Is that an extra little condition or ask?
I think you name that. I think it's important to name in cooperation and with should there be willing participation from Colorado tribal members and communities, would be appropriate to include. And that's a great signal to the agencies to be inclusive, and to Councilmember White-Skunk's perspective to give a seat at the table consciously, not on second thought.
Yeah, I would love to have that attached to that direction. And then Katie brought this up, and I think it's something we talked about even at the last Forest Health Council. Councilmember White-Skunk, I think it would be a great recommendation at the full council, and not just from the legislative committee, but maybe for you to bring this up at the next full council about maybe adding another seat or two from the other nations, so we have more than, you've been a fantastic voice, but if you felt maybe more representation would be welcome, that we could, if you would bring that up at the next full council, I certainly think this committee would rise up and support if you would bring that up. So I don't know how you feel about that.
I think it would be an opportunity for the tribal nations perspective, the American Indian perspective that are a part of the state of Colorado. I mean, it's an awesome, it would be an awesome thing for the tribes to be a part of this discussion and this council as well, so that there's more tribal nations at the table. Like I said a few minutes ago, there's others that are chiming in and wanting to be involved, actively involved, and this would be an opportunity for us to do this. And I will surely and definitely bring that up as a suggestion at the next council session.
Great. And then maybe Courtney, you can just signal to Director Gibbs and stuff for the, that we might be bringing this up at the full council, just for them to. So I just thank you, Councilmember White Skunk. I appreciate your voice and your perspective so much. So I need a motion to approve that we administratively ask for direct administrative action to form as symposium in the next year. I don't have a different word, Director McCombs, if you have a different.
Information session, right? So the
Information session.
that way
with,
it can be whatever it turns into.
Information direct for Colorado State Forest Service, Colorado Fire Commission, and the subcommittee to formally convene a information session in the next year to discuss this insurance question and other conditions for prescribed mitigation measures, and to also formally ask that we explore cultural, traditional, tribal nation practices and add that as part of the information gathering, and to have several of the tribes, invite several of those voices to that information session. And that's a big, long direction, but trying to making sure we bring in the cultural conditions from the tribal nation, but also to make sure we have kind of that insurance question addressed. Mr. Morgan.
I move that you do the Matt and Jody council question as a motion. You just, all the word salad that you just got put together there.
Yeah, sorry. It's a big word salad. I sometimes
You
do
can
words.
state it. I will so move.
It's
Okay.
a big word salad, but I think it's kind of, we want to be very specific about who we want to have there, and then what we want to explore, but also bring in that the tribal nation perspective. So, Christy.
I'm a logger, not a wordsmith.
I'm not either. So we have a motion. Christy, did you want to second it, or did you want to add to that?
I just had a question. It seems like a long timeline. The insurance question is an issue. Is there a way to fast track it?
Good question. I agree. It's something that needs to be done now. My thoughts on this, and I don't know if Director Milcombs, your thoughts. It's something we need to do. Obviously, it's going to be a heavy lift, and Mr. Morgan used some colorful descriptions that I can visualize. That it might be great to have all the stakeholders convene and present what instead of just saying do what California does. That may not gain as much traction as if we use that as something to look at, but for us to have something to brought forward with multiple stakeholders, so we can kind of address some of the known opposition or challenges that might face it, so that we can have maybe clear some of the barriers going forward. I agree with you, would love to get it done sooner than later, but I figure if we don't bring the Fire Commission in on this and have all the stakeholders and come as a very united, loud group and build off this momentum, and I think it's just a lot to, we could give it a year, but I bet it's going to happen I bet Director McCombs, I think with the subcommittee, it might get going quicker. But having this formal Forest Health Committee, legislative committee stamp, it might accelerate this conversation. I don't know what you thought about that, Director McCombs, but I agree with you, Christy. I don't want to push it off, but Director McCombs.
On the insurance piece, so I'm just kind of writing something in the chat that I'll post real quick. That's maybe an easy synopsis for this, but I think calling out the core issues around spoke management, liability, right, which is insurance, and capacity, like the actual having enough humans to pull off these burns at the complexity and intensity that they occur. You know, if we can run through those three issues in the next year, we may have the ability to potentially put forth some policy formulation towards the end of the session. I'll just be candid that I believe DFPC is going to be a little trepidatious about saying we're going to take on insurance this year, because there's an enormous amount of stakeholdering that would occur and huge implications for the WUI Fire Code Board that's being formulated, a lot of things that are sort of already in motion. So I just want us to, but this is the groups, you know, if this is the sense of the group, by God, let's move forward and push policymakers and administrators to take this on more aggressively. But I'm just telling you that, like, it will be met with some trepidation and resistance, because there's just so much to be put in place. And so the strategic planning process that DFPC and CSFS are going to be put forward to those subcommittee groups is really the, you know, we've got piles in front of us. If we can burn piles, we can start thinking about burning other things. And so that's kind of where our focus is. Let's get comfortable doing the things that we know we have to do and to reduce fuel conditions that we've created ourselves as a state, and then start, you know, crawl, walk, run to that large scale broadcast burn or those managed fires concepts that we know we want to move towards. So let me just finish this thought in the chat and see if it works for y'all, and then we can.
And I'd be happy to amend my motion to be more with the three specifics.
It says the things that we've said. It's just a little clearer for Courtney's purposes.
That sounds great. Mr. Morgan.
Yes, in reality here, you've already answered my question to some degree. I actually introduced some things on this back when Roy Romer was governor, so it's been going on for a while. But I guess the thing I'm asking here for is, if we're going to back up or whatever, and I agree very much with Christy, let's have a timeline that we're pushing for. So it sounds to me like we don't feel that a bill for this next legislative session is realistic. If we don't feel that, then let's have a timeline of events that we're going to want to accomplish. If we're going to have a bill in the session after that, or if we're going to try to have a bill in this session, then we need a real timeline of the events that we need to see happen. So I guess rather than a big nebulous concept here, I think it's important that we do this. So chop, who's going to run the whip here and get a time frame? And what do you think the time frame would be, Director McCombs, in actual dates?
I would really want to defer, Mark, to Chief Morgan in this regard. This is their statutory jurisdictional responsibility, and I believe DFPC needs to lead on the commitment and time and space. That's a fair answer.
And I think it's accurate, and thanks for that, Director McCombs. I also think that's very accurate, and also thanks for reminding me that they're also trying to convene and create this WUI Code Board, and that was a monumental task to get done, and it's going to be monumental to bring that board together. Also, feedback from the general session I keep hearing, even yesterday, from legislators, is there were so many bills that were dropped that were so complex in this session that were last minute, and people didn't have a chance to really be a conversation or felt like it was a lot of information. And I think if we could be very successful in this, if we do all the stakeholdering and craft this together with all the stakeholders, even the ones who might be raising some barriers, I think it would be, and I agree, we need the solution now, but I'd much rather get it done in a very collaborative way to kind of address it. So, and also there's the capacity issues of these departments having lots of work in front of them, and we got to think about that as well. So, so I'm going to amend my motion. If you're agreeable to that, Mr. Morgan, since you have made that motion, or I want to read what Director McComb said for the record. The Legislative Committee wants to direct the Colorado State Forest Service and DFPC and other agencies and or stakeholders to convene an informational session or sessions to increase awareness and facilitate participation in the prescribed fire policy development in Colorado. In particular, tribal voices and perspectives shall be included to raise awareness of the historical tribal cultural practices and expertise in prescribed fire. Core issues to be addressed should include liability, smoke management, and resources capacity. And that would be the formal motion or formal direction and motion. So Mr. Morgan, would you be open to
I would withdraw my motion, and I would be willing to sponsor that or make that motion with one more item. I would like to see a recommended timeline for this procedure, so that it can be fairly far out there, but let's have something that we're shooting for.
I think we had put in the next year, a year from July 31st to have this done.
Long as we have gates that we're looking for, so that we can bring a sense of urgency, even if it's not real
Okay.
quick, just some
So
accountability here to what we're trying to do.
So Director McCombs made a great suggestion within 12 months from full Forest Health Council, Advisory Council approval. So we'll add that to the motion. That sounds great. So do we have a
And
second?
we'll try to faster.
Okay. Yeah. So I have a second on that motion.
I'll second.
Okay. Any further discussion? Okay. All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Okay, so thank you all. So we're almost out of time, but let's talk about two more things I think that we'd like to maybe explore. The seed collection and deficit and that workforce issue. And do we need to have some paid internships or promote that as a workforce development, since it sounds like a lot of those folks are just like older farmers and retiring agencies. Is that something we want to, we don't have to have a specific, but do we want to bring this as a topic that we want to support as a workforce development or help with that, with either paid internships or focus on the seed collection or seed deficit? And the other one is we talked about continuing this workforce development and capacity, boots on the ground to get the work done and kind of continue our work. Thanks, Christy. So just those two other ideas, we can just put them on the list for our full vote for next week. So that's all I wanted, because I know we don't have time to discuss them. We kind of discussed them, but I want to put them on the list for our vote next week. So can I have a motion to put those two ideas on the list for next week, just in the interest of time, since we have a quorum still?
I'll move.
Is there a second? There's a second from Pat. All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Okay. So with that, that does not mean this is our final list. And thank you, Christy. If you have other ideas or something comes up for our meeting next week, and I think we should plan for an hour. Now we've kind of really drudged through some really big topics. That doesn't mean this is our full list of recommendations for the whole council. So if you wake up at 4 a.m. like I do, oh, this is something we should talk about, write it down and we'll bring it up. And with that, any other new business or questions or thoughts on this? I just wanted to let you know, I'm going to go visit Teller County, Park County, Gunnison County Forest this weekend, and meet with some commissioners and walk through their forests and talk things. So I might have some feedback from them for our next, just for future reference. I'm going to go literally walk through their forest. So appreciate everyone. Any other further questions, comments, thoughts?
real quick, Commissioner, so I'll be meeting with DFPC like in 32 seconds to talk specifically about how we're going to move forward with the strategic planning effort. And I'll have feedback for this group in our next meeting on those meetings. And then again, I just want to thank this group for your engagement, your energy, your thoughtfulness. It's just so wonderful to have folks like you in our corner. So just thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. I know this was a lot, but we covered a lot of ground. I think we got a lot of great things accomplished today. And I just want to thank you all we've been meeting weekly and you guys have covered a lot of stuff. And I can't wait to bring this to the Full Force Health Council. And we're going to have certainly a very robust update for the annual report. So, which is great because this is showing that we're actually digging into this. So thank you all for your time today. Great work and have a wonderful weekend. We'll see you next week. Thank you.
Thanks all.
We are adjourned. Have a great weekend, Mr. Morgan. Okay, Courtney. Oh, you're on mute, I think, or I can't hear you.